You stand on the platform at King's Cross Station on September 1st, 1971, watching steam curl upward from the Hogwarts Express like silver ribbons of possibility, and you're about to witness something that the history books will get entirely wrong because that base so also focus on the wars and the heroes and the villains, but they'll miss the most important part, which is how four 11-year-old boys with absolutely nothing in common except a train compartment and terrible timing managed to become the most legendary troublemakers Hogwarts had ever seen, though of course they didn't know that yet, because right now, James Potter is just a skinny kid with glasses that keep sliding down his nose and hair that looks like he's been electrocuted, which is actually just how his hair naturally grows. A fact that will frustrate him for his entire life, despite his many attempts to tame it with everything from Sleek Easy's hair potion to actual magic spells. You watch as he boards the train with the kind of confidence that only comes from being raised by parents who told him every single day that he was extraordinary, which sounds like it might produce an insufferable child, and you'd be absolutely right about that. At least for the first few years. Sirius Black boards 3 compartments down, and you can see how his robes are perfectly pressed, and his trunk is monogrammed with the Black family crest. All those elaborate swirls and stars that represent one of the oldest pure-blood families in Britain. Though, if you could read his mind right now, you'd see he's already planning his escape from everything that crest represents, already feeling suffocated by expectations that taste like ash in his mouth. Remus Lupin sits in a compartment by himself with a book that's far too advanced for a first year, something about medieval defense mechanisms against dark creatures, which is ironic in a way that would be funny if it weren't so sad, and you notice the careful way he holds himself, like he's trying to take up as little space as possible, trying not to be noticed, and there are shadows under his eyes that no 11-year-old should have. Peter Pettigrew almost misses the train entirely because his mother is fussing over him, tucking his scarf tighter even though it's not remotely cold, reminding him to write every week. And you can see how he's simultaneously embarrassed and comforted by her attention, already worrying about whether he'll measure up to everyone else, whether he belongs in this world of magic at all. Now here's where history gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean historians still argue about this at academic conferences while drinking too much mead. But the generally accepted version is that James and Sirius met first when James wandered down the train corridor looking for someone who seemed interesting, which was his 11-year-old code for not boring. And he found Sirius sitting alone looking both aristocratic and miserable, a combination that James found fascinating. According to the diary of Euphemia Potter, which was donated to the Hogwarts archives in 1995, James came home that first Christmas and told his parents he'd met the most interesting person alive who hates his family almost as much as he loves breaking rules, which Euphemia noted with some concern but also a trace of amusement because she could already see where this was heading. You follow them as they discover they're both bound for Gryffindor, and you can practically see the friendship forming like a chemical reaction, all spark and flash and probably a bit dangerous if left unsupervised. Remus ends up in their compartment by accident when everywhere else fills up. And you watch him hesitate in the doorway, clearly hoping to remain invisible. But James Potter has never met a silence he didn't want to fill with words. And within 5 minutes, he's learned that Remus likes reading and hates pumpkin juice, and has a nervous habit of touching his face where one day, years later, scars will tell a story that right now only Remus and his parents know. Peter joins them last, looking for a toad that isn't even his but belongs to another first year who's crying in the corridor, and this small act of kindness is quintessentially Peter, at least the Peter of these early years, the one who hasn't yet been twisted by fear and desperation into something none of them would recognize. The Sorting Hat takes 2 minutes with James, which is longer than average according to records kept by Professor McGonagall, who was deputy headmistress even then. though significantly younger and with hair that was still mostly dark. And the pause happens because the hat sees ambition and cunning enough for Slytherin, but it also sees loyalty and daring and a fundamental goodness that just needs proper direction. So Gryffindor it is, and James practically runs to the table where red and gold banners wave in an enchanted breeze. Sirius sits under the hat for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is the longest sorting in a decade and won't be beaten until Harry Potter's own sorting in 1991. And you can feel the tension in the Great Hall as everyone wonders whether a Black will break tradition, whether he'll join every single one of his ancestors in Slytherin, and when the hat finally shouts, "Gryffindor!" you can hear the gasps echo off the enchanted ceiling with its perfect recreation of the night sky outside, complete with constellations that ancient astronomers used to navigate by before GPS made everything less romantic. The look on Sirius's face is pure defiant joy, and across the hall at the Slytherin table, you can see his younger cousin, Narcissa's expression of shock while beside her, Lucius Malfoy sneers with a disdain that will last decades. Remus becomes a Gryffindor with barely a second's pause from the hat, and Peter follows a minute later. And just like that, 4 boys who might have never spoken to each other again after that train ride are bound together by house colors and dormitory arrangements and the simple proximity that creates so many of life's most important relationships, though of course none of them realize this yet because they're 11 and mostly thinking about whether the feast will have treacle tart. Now, I should tell you something that the books gloss over, which is that James Potter was kind of unbearable for the entire first year, possibly the second year too, if we're being honest, and this is a historical fact supported by multiple sources, including Professor McGonagall's private correspondence with Albus Dumbledore, in which she describes James as talented but insufferably arrogant with a particular gift for finding trouble and a particular blindness to his own faults. He hexed students who looked at him wrong. He talked constantly about Quidditch, despite being too young to play on the house team, and he had this habit of showing off in every single class, which might have been merely annoying, except he was actually good enough to back it up, which somehow made it worse. You watch him in Transfiguration, turning his matchstick into a perfectly formed needle on the first try, while others are still struggling to make their matches even slightly pointy. And yes, he's talented, but did he have to do that little flourish with his wand and grin at everyone like he just invented magic itself? Sirius was his perfect partner in crime, equally talented and equally convinced that rules were suggestions meant for lesser beings. And together they discovered that the portrait of Sir Cadogan on the 3rd floor would challenge anyone to a duel at any hour if you just asked nicely, and that the suits of armor could be charmed to sing opera but only if you cast the spell at exactly midnight, and that Professor Slughorn kept crystallized pineapple in his desk drawer and would forgive almost any transgression if you complimented his collection of photographs with famous former students. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean this is the part that most people miss when they talk about the Marauders, because Remus Lupin was arguably the best student of the 4, certainly the most studious, definitely the most likely to remind them about homework. And yet he never came across as annoying or preachy, probably because he had this way of suggesting rather than demanding, of making it seem like studying was just something he happened to be doing. If anyone wanted to join him, no pressure. You see him in the library most evenings, always at the same table by the window, where the last rays of sunlight stretch across the pages of whatever advanced text he's reading. And sometimes James and Sirius join him, but mostly they don't. Not yet. Not in these early years when they're still too busy discovering what happens when you bewitch snowballs to follow Slytherins around or charm the school bells to ring at random intervals. Peter thrives in this group in a way he never would have alone, and you can see how their friendship gives him confidence, how he laughs louder and speaks up more often, and even manages a few successful pranks of his own. like the time he charmed all the Slytherin team's Quidditch robes to turn pink during practice, which was both simple and devastating in its effectiveness. There's a scholarly debate that happens every few years in the pages of Transfiguration today about whether the Marauders were actually geniuses or just talented students with too much time on their hands. And honestly, the answer is probably both, because yes, they were gifted, especially in Transfiguration, where they'd go on to achieve something that even most adult wizards couldn't manage. But also, they had the kind of freedom that comes from being young and boarding at school, and not having to worry about adult responsibilities like jobs or bills or children, which meant they could dedicate hours to figuring out exactly the right wand movement to make suits of armor perform a synchronized dance routine. You watch them in second year discover the room of requirement entirely by accident when James is running from Filch and thinking very hard about needing a place to hide, and suddenly there's a door that definitely wasn't there before, and inside is a room full of hiding places and comfortable chairs and absolutely no caretaker. And they'll use this room for years for planning and practicing and occasionally just avoiding homework. Sirius receives a howler from his mother in November of second year after he's caught charming Snape's hair to turn green and stay that way for a week. And you watch the red envelope explode over breakfast with Walburga Black's voice shrieking about family honor and proper behavior and how Sirius is disgracing the Black name, and the entire Great Hall falls silent except James loudly says, "Well, she seems nice," which makes Sirius laugh so hard he almost chokes on his pumpkin juice, and from that moment, they're not just friends, but brothers in every way that matters. Now here's a detail that casual fans always miss but true historians obsess over, which is that Lily Evans thought James Potter was the most annoying person at Hogwarts for at least 4 years, possibly 5 if we're counting generously, and we know this because of letters she wrote to her friend Emmeline Vance that were published posthumously in a collection called Letters from Lily in 2003. And in one letter from third year, she describes James as talented but completely up himself, always showing off, always hexing people for no reason, always with that stupid grin like he's never faced a consequence in his life. You watch their interactions in third year, and it's honestly painful, like watching someone repeatedly walk into a glass door they swear isn't there, because James tries everything to impress her, catches the snitch in practically every Quidditch match, answers questions correctly in every class, even tries to tone down the hexing, but somehow everything he does just makes her roll her eyes harder. Sirius finds this absolutely hilarious and offers completely terrible advice, like, maybe hex her friend, girls love that, and just tell her she's pretty, what's the worst that could happen? And James actually tries both of these approaches with predictably disastrous results. And honestly, it's a miracle. Lily Evans didn't just transfer to Beauxbaton to escape the sheer secondhand embarrassment of watching James Potter flirt. But something else is happening during these years that you need to understand, because it's the foundation for everything that comes later, which is that Remus Lupin disappears once a month like clockwork. And at first, the others don't really notice because they're 11 and 12 and 13 and mostly concerned with their own dramas. But by third year, James starts asking questions like, where does Remus go? And why does he always look so ill afterward? And why does it always happen around the full moon? Which is the kind of observation that seems obvious in retrospect, but actually requires paying attention to someone else's patterns over multiple years. You watch James and Sirius putting pieces together like a puzzle, comparing notes in the dormitory after Remus has disappeared again, and there's this moment, this beautiful moment that never gets enough credit in the histories, where they figure it out and their immediate reaction isn't fear or disgust, but concern and determination to help, which tells you everything you need to know about why these boys became legends. Peter figures it out because they tell him, not because he noticed himself, which is perhaps the first sign of something that won't become clear for many years, this tendency to follow rather than lead, to wait for others to show him what to think. But right now, it just seems like he's less observant than the others. And when they tell him, his reaction is appropriate shock followed by immediate agreement that they need to help Remus, that they need to do something to make the transformations less lonely. The scholarly debate about what happens next has filled entire books with titles like The Animagus Achievement, Genius or Recklessness, and Underage Transformation, a study in magical ambition. But the basic facts are these. James Potter, Sirius Black, and Peter Pettigrew decided at age 14 to become animagi, which is magic so advanced and difficult that it requires registration with the Ministry of Magic and takes even talented adult wizards years to achieve. And they decided to do this illegally, without adult supervision, using only library books and pure determination. You watch them over the next 2 years, which is how long the process takes, according to Hermione Granger's later research published in The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 7. Sneaking ingredients for the potion that has to sit undisturbed in a quiet, dark place for one entire month between the full moons, keeping a mandrake leaf in their mouths for an entire month without swallowing it or removing it even while sleeping or eating or attending classes, which James later described as the most disgusting thing I've ever done, and I once had to clean the Quidditch changing rooms after a match where half the team had food poisoning. There's a particular type of storm required for the final transformation, one that includes lightning, and you watch them waiting through the spring of their 5th year for the right conditions, checking the weather obsessively, until finally one night in May the clouds gather dark and electric and they know this is it. What happens in the Shrieking Shack that night is something only the 4 of them ever knew completely, but James told his son years later, in one of those conversations that Harry would treasure after his parents died, that the first transformation felt like being turned inside out and remade from scratch. Like every cell in his body was remembering what it meant to be something else. And when he opened his eyes, he was looking at the world from about 2 feet lower than usual, and his head felt heavy with antlers that his human brain wasn't quite prepared to balance. Sirius became a bear-like dog, massive and shaggy, which fit his personality so perfectly it was almost comical, while Peter became a rat, small enough to slip through gaps and hide in corners, which also fit in ways that no one wanted to examine too closely back then. The nickname came naturally. Prongs for James because of the antlers, Padfoot for Sirius because of those huge paws, Wormtail for Peter because of that long hairless tail, and Moony for Remus because, well, obvious reasons, and together they were the Marauders, a name that started as a joke but became an identity, became a legend, became something that students would still whisper about decades later. You watch Remus the morning after that first full moon with his new friends, seeing him realize that he can remember the night, remember running through the forbidden forest with a stag and a dog and a rat, remember feeling not alone for the first time in years, and the tears in his eyes are the kind that come from relief so overwhelming it physically hurts, from the weight of a secret that's been crushing you suddenly being shared and somehow becoming lighter. Now, here's where I need to tell you about the other side of this story, the part that gets messy and complicated and doesn't fit neatly into the legend, which is that James Potter and Sirius Black were also sometimes bullies, and this is a historical fact that even their strongest defenders have to acknowledge, because there are too many witnesses, too many accounts, too many memories preserved in pensieves and documented in records. You watch them in 5th year, drunk on power and popularity and the intoxicating feeling of being good at magic, hexing Severus Snape by the lake, for what James will later claim was retaliation for Snape's interest in dark magic, but what honestly looks a lot more like entertainment and showing off for Lily Evans, who is watching from nearby with her friend Mary McDonald. The spell that lifts Snape into the air by his ankle, leaving him hanging upside down while soap bubbles fill his mouth, is creative and technically impressive and also completely, obviously, unnecessarily cruel, and when Lily intervenes, furious and disgusted, James makes it worse by trying to blackmail her with, "I'll stop if you go out with me," which is possibly the worst thing he could have said in that moment or any moment ever. Remus is there too, and this is the part that he'll regret for the rest of his life. But he doesn't intervene. He just sits by the lake with his book and pretends not to notice. And later he'll say that being a prefect who doesn't stop his friends from bullying is somehow worse than not being a prefect at all, because he had responsibility and authority, and he just sat there. And you can see this guilt in his face even now, even at 15, even as he turns another page and tries to convince himself it's not his problem. Peter laughs because James and Sirius are laughing, because that's what Peter does. He mirrors the mood of whoever is strongest in the room, which is a survival mechanism that will eventually curdle into something far more dangerous, but right now just seems like excessive agreement. There's a whole academic paper by Professor Adelaide Merton titled "The Complexity of Heroic Narrative, Re-examining the Marauders Through a Critical Lens" that argues we need to hold these contradictions in our heads simultaneously, that James and Sirius could be loyal and brave and good, while also sometimes being cruel and careless with their power, that people are complex and teenagers are especially complex. And maybe the real story is about growth and change, rather than simple heroes and villains. You watch James in 6th year starting to change, not dramatically or all at once, but in small ways, stopping mid-hex sometimes and lowering his wand, still talking about Quidditch constantly, but also actually listening when other people talk, even starting to treat Lily like a human being with thoughts and feelings, rather than a prize to be won, which is the absolute bare minimum, but still represents progress from where he started. The transformation accelerates in 7th year when James becomes head boy, which shocks absolutely everyone, including James himself, who was convinced they'd choose Remus. And you watch him grow into the responsibility, like putting on robes that are slightly too large at first, but gradually start to fit. Learning that leadership means sometimes stopping your friends from making stupid decisions, even when those friends are Sirius Black, and Sirius really wants to enchant the Slytherin common room entrance to only open if you say, "I'm a pompous git," 3 times while hopping on 1 foot. Lily becomes head girl. Because of course she does, because Lily Evans is brilliant and responsible and everything a head girl should be. And being forced to work together on patrols and prefect schedules and student discipline means they actually have to have conversations. Real ones. Not just James showing off and Lily rolling her eyes. And somewhere around October, she realizes he's actually funny when he's not trying so hard. And he realizes she's not just pretty, but genuinely interesting. Passionate about equality and justice and defending people who can't defend themselves. Their first kiss happens in January of 7th year in the head's common room at 2 in the morning after a long night of planning the Valentine's Day ball, and James will later tell Sirius it was like every good thing that ever happened to me all at once, which is disgustingly romantic, but also completely sincere because James Potter loves exactly 2 things in life with his whole heart: Quidditch and Lily Evans, and in that order until she kisses him, and suddenly the order reverses so fast it gives him emotional whiplash. You watch Sirius being simultaneously happy for his best friend and worried that this means things will change, that James will have less time for Marauder activities, that Lily will somehow steal James away from him, which is both understandable given Sirius's abandonment issues stemming from his family situation, and also completely unnecessary because James Potter has enough love in him for everyone. This is his superpower and his defining characteristic, this ability to be utterly devoted to multiple people without any of them feeling neglected. The Marauders in 7th year are at the height of their powers, and by powers I mean both magical ability and social influence, because they're the most popular students in Gryffindor, possibly in the whole school. They're all talented wizards who ace their NEWTs, despite spending half their time planning pranks, and they've created something that will outlive all of them. Though they don't know that yet as they sit in the room of requirement working on their masterpiece. You're holding something impossible in your hands, and you don't even fully understand yet what you're seeing, because the Marauder's map looks like a simple piece of parchment, blank and innocent until you tap it with your wand and say, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Which is exactly the kind of password 4 teenage boys would create, equal parts rebellious and playful. And suddenly, the parchment blooms with ink that spreads like veins across the surface, resolving into a perfect representation of Hogwarts Castle, complete with every corridor, every classroom, every secret passage, and most impressively, every single person in the castle represented by a tiny dot labeled with their name, moving in real time as the actual person moves through the actual building. The magic required to create this is so advanced that even Dumbledore expressed private admiration for it, according to notes found in his office after his death, which were published in the posthumous collection The Dumbledore Papers in 2009. And he specifically wrote that the combination of the homunculus charm to track individuals, the extraordinarily complex cartography enchantment to map a building that literally changes configuration on a regular basis, and the security features that insult anyone who tries to read the map without the proper password, shows a level of magical innovation that I have rarely seen in students of any age, combined with a sense of humor that is either delightful or deeply concerning, depending on one's perspective. You watch the 4 of them over months of 7th year, huddled in various secret locations, arguing about whether to include the room of requirement on the map or keep it secret even from the map itself, debating which insults should appear when Snape tries to open it. They eventually settle on having the map call him Mr. Snivelus, which is petty, but also they're 17, testing and retesting the tracking enchantments by having Peter run to different parts of the castle while the others watch his dot move on the map, making sure it works through every floor and around every corner, and even in places protected by other enchantments. Sirius suggests including a feature that would show what people are doing, not just where they are. But James points out that would be invasive in ways that even they're not comfortable with, which shows a level of ethical consideration that honestly surprises you given their history of reading other people's mail and listening in on private conversations using extendable ears that Fred and George Weasley definitely did not invent first. The Marauders were doing it decades earlier. The amount of castle exploration required to make the map accurate is staggering, and you follow them through passages that even the ghosts have forgotten about, behind tapestries and through trapdoors and under staircases that fold in on themselves in geometrically impossible ways. And they document everything, measuring distances with careful charm work, noting which stairs vanish on Thursdays, marking which corridors are patrolled by which professors at which times. There's a weekend in March when they discover a passage that leads from behind a mirror on the 4th floor all the way down to the Hogwarts kitchens, and this becomes instantly useful for midnight snacks, but also for the kind of high-speed escapes that any good prankster needs in their repertoire. And you watch them test it by having Remus create a distraction in Transfiguration, while the other 3 slip away through the mirror and end up in the kitchens eating treacle tart with house elves who are absolutely delighted to have visitors and keep offering more food until James has to undo the top button of his robes. Peter's contribution to the map is often overlooked in historical accounts that focus on James and Sirius as the brilliant ones and Remus as the responsible one, but Peter is actually the one who figures out how to make the ink permanent without fading, which is harder than it sounds because normal ink on parchment degrades over time, and he researches obscure preservation charms, usually used by medieval monks for illuminated manuscripts. And he's genuinely proud when his solution works, and you can see in his face the pleasure of contributing something valuable, of being essential to the group's success. The map's security features are multi-layered and honestly kind of excessive, which is very on-brand for teenagers who think they're cleverer than everyone else, and sometimes actually are. So in addition to requiring the password to open, the map also insults anyone who tries to force it open without the password, and the insults are personalized based on who's trying to open it. So when Snape tries, and they test this by leaving the map where he'll find it and watching from under James's invisibility cloak, The map calls him a professor of dubious authority and even more dubious personal hygiene, which makes Sirius laugh so hard he almost gives away their position. When you tap the map with your wand and say, "Mischief Managed," which is the password to close it, the ink disappears smoothly, leaving no trace that the parchment is anything other than a blank bit of scrap. And this security was absolutely necessary because getting caught with a magical item that reveals everyone's location at all times would result in expulsion so fast they wouldn't even have time to pack their trunks. You're watching them present the finished map to each other one night in the spring of 7th year, passing it around the dormitory like it's a trophy they've won, and in a way it is. This is their masterpiece, their legacy, the thing that will tell future generations that the Marauders were here. And they were brilliant, and they refused to be constrained by rules that seemed arbitrary or boring. Now let me tell you about something that doesn't get enough attention in the popular retellings, which is that being an animagus is illegal without ministry registration, and James and Sirius and Peter remained unregistered their entire lives, which means they were technically criminals from age 15 onward, which adds a whole new dimension to their eventual work with the Order of the Phoenix because they're already living outside the law, already comfortable with breaking rules they consider unjust or unnecessary. The list of registered animagi in the 20th century is shockingly short according to ministry records that were made public in 1998 as part of post-war transparency reforms. Just 7 people registered between 1900 and 1980, which gives you some sense of how rare and difficult this magic is, and yet 3 teenagers managed it without adult supervision, which is either inspiring or terrifying, depending on whether you value achievement or safety more highly. You watch Remus during full moons throughout 7th year, running through the Forbidden Forest with his friends, and the difference in his demeanor is remarkable because before he was always slightly tense, always slightly separate, always carrying the weight of his secret like a stone in his chest. But now he's looser, happier, more willing to joke and laugh and just exist without constantly monitoring himself. And this is what friendship does at its best. It gives you permission to be yourself, including the parts you've been taught to hide. The centaurs in the Forbidden Forest are not thrilled about a werewolf and 3 animagi crashing through their territory once a month. And there's an incident in April that nearly turns violent when the Marauders accidentally interrupt a centaur ceremony. But Remus manages to communicate somehow in wolf form that they mean no harm. And eventually the centaurs tolerate their presence with a sort of resigned irritation, the way you might tolerate neighbors who play music too loud but aren't actually dangerous. Sirius in dog form is large enough that he can keep Remus from going near the castle or Hogsmeade, steering him deeper into the forest when the wolf gets ideas about hunting in populated areas. And this is crucial because a werewolf attacking a human would mean death for Remus, either literally at the hands of angry villagers or figuratively through imprisonment in Azkaban. And Sirius takes this responsibility seriously in a way he doesn't take most responsibilities seriously, understanding that his friend's life depends on his vigilance one night a month. James uses his antlers for defense when they encounter creatures in the forest that are less friendly than centaurs, acromantulas, and the occasional stray dark creature that's wandered in from who knows where. And there's one memorable night when he faces down a full-grown acromantula, which are massive spiders with leg spans of up to 15 feet, according to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and he charges it with his antlers lowered like a battering ram, while Sirius flanks from the side. And this is the kind of teamwork that will later make them effective Order members, this instinctive coordination that comes from years of practice in high-stakes situations. Peter in rat form is the scout, small enough to squeeze into places the others can't reach, quick enough to dart ahead and check if a path is safe, and you watch him take pride in this role, in being useful in a way that his size enables rather than prevents. Though there's always this slight edge of anxiety in him, this sense that he's the smallest and weakest and most expendable, which isn't true but feels true to him in ways that will matter later. Now, here's a detail that scholarly debates absolutely thrive on, which is what exactly Lily knew about the animagus situation and when she knew it. Because on one hand, she's dating and eventually marries James, so it seems impossible that he wouldn't tell her something this significant. But on the other hand, the fewer people who know about illegal activity, the safer everyone is. And James loves Lily, but he also loves Remus and wouldn't risk Remus's secret for anything. So the timing of Lily's discovery is actually a matter of historical dispute, with Professor Bathsheba Babbling arguing in her essay Secrets and Lies, Trust in the Potter Relationship, that James told Lily everything immediately upon their becoming official, while Professor Septima Vector counters in The Mathematics of Secrecy, a timeline analysis, that the secret was kept until after graduation when the stakes were lower. You watch James and Lily in those final months of 7th year, and they're disgustingly happy in the way that new couples are, finishing each other's sentences and holding hands in corridors and studying together in the library where Lily actually studies, and James mostly just watches her study while pretending to read his own book, and Sirius makes theatrical vomiting noises whenever they kiss within his line of sight, but you can tell he's happy for them, even if he does occasionally mourn the loss of his partner in crime to the demands of a relationship. The graduation ceremony at Hogwarts in 1978 is bittersweet because these 4 boys have spent 7 years in this castle, 7 years of friendship and magic and adventure, and now they're being sent out into a world that's rapidly darkening, where Lord Voldemort's influence grows stronger every month, where Order members are disappearing and bodies are being found, and the Ministry of Magic is either unable or unwilling to stop it, and you can see in their faces during the ceremony a mixture of excitement and apprehension, ready to start their lives, but also aware that their lives might be very short given the circumstances. Dumbledore gives a speech that day about courage and choice, which is very on brand for him because those are his favorite themes, and he talks about how darkness can only be fought by those willing to stand in the light, even when standing in the light makes you a target. And this is basically a recruitment speech for the Order of the Phoenix, though he doesn't say that explicitly because half the parents in the audience would have a collective heart attack if they knew he was recruiting their children to fight in a war. You watch the 4 Marauders leave Hogwarts for the last time, walking across the grounds toward Hogsmeade where they'll catch the train back to London, and they're making jokes about becoming famous and rich and never having to read another book about transfiguration theory. But underneath the jokes, there's a current of uncertainty because they're entering a world that's nothing like the protected bubble of school, where consequences are permanent and failures can't be fixed with extra credit or detention. James and Lily move in together almost immediately, taking a small flat in Godric's Hollow that's cozy in the way that small flats are when you're in love and poor and don't own much furniture yet. And you watch them painting walls together and arguing cheerfully about where to hang pictures and learning how to cook, because neither of them paid much attention in the kitchen at home. Sirius technically lives with his uncle Alphard at first, the only Black family member who doesn't completely disown him, but he's at James and Lily's flat so often that he basically lives there too, sprawled on their couch eating their food and commenting on their decor choices. And when Alphard dies later that year and leaves Sirius a substantial inheritance, much to the fury of the rest of the Black family, Sirius uses part of it to buy his own flat in London, but still spends most of his time at James's, because being alone reminds him too much of the isolation he felt growing up at Grimmauld Place. Remus struggles more than the others after graduation because being a werewolf means most jobs are closed to him, either because of explicit discrimination or because monthly absences are hard to explain without revealing his condition, and you watch him go through a series of temporary positions, teaching assistant jobs that last until the full moon, manual labor that he can handle until his body gives out, living in increasingly shabby apartments and pretending he's fine when his friends offer help, because accepting help means admitting defeat. And Remus Lupin has spent his whole life trying to prove he's not a burden. Peter gets a job at the Ministry of Magic in a minor administrative role, something in the Department of Magical Transportation according to employment records from that era. And it's not glamorous or important, but it's stable and it comes with benefits, and he's proud of it in a quiet way. Proud to be contributing, proud to be a functional adult with a job and a paycheck, even if James and Sirius sometimes make jokes about paperwork that sting more than they probably intend. The Order of the Phoenix recruits all four of them within months of graduation, which isn't surprising given that Dumbledore has been watching them since first year and knows exactly what they're capable of. And you watch them take their vows to fight against Voldemort and his Death Eaters, to protect the innocent and uphold the light, and they're so young, barely 18 years old, still figuring out how to be adults, and now they're being asked to be soldiers. James and Sirius excel in order work, because it turns out that years of breaking school rules and avoiding capture has given them skills that translate beautifully to underground resistance work. They know how to move unseen, how to communicate in code, how to think 3 steps ahead of whoever is chasing them. And Moody, Alistair Moody, the legendary Auror who's paranoid and scarred and absolutely brilliant at defense, takes them under his wing and teaches them combat magic that goes far beyond what they learned in school. Curses that can incapacitate without killing, shields that can withstand dark magic, strategies for fighting when outnumbered. Lily brings a different skill set to the Order, which is research and analysis, taking scattered reports from various members and finding patterns, predicting where Death Eaters might strike next based on previous attacks, and she works closely with Dumbledore on this, spending hours in meetings discussing strategy while James is out on actual missions. And there's tension sometimes because James wants her safe at home, and Lily wants to contribute in whatever way she can. And they have arguments about this that echo through their small flat, though they always end with both of them apologizing and acknowledging that they're both scared and love each other. Remus does intelligence work, using his outsider status to move in circles that wouldn't welcome most Order members, talking to werewolves and dark creatures who have information about Death Eater movements. And this is dangerous in ways different from combat, because he's always one wrong word away from being attacked or exposed, but he's good at it, good at reading people and knowing when to push and when to back away. Peter does support work, carrying messages and maintaining safe houses and doing the unglamorous logistics that keep an underground organization running, and he's reliable at this, punctual and careful and thorough, though you can see him watching James and Sirius come back from missions with stories and glory, and you can sense the beginning of resentment, not obvious yet, just a seed that will grow in dark soil. You're watching the war escalate through 1978 and 79, deaths mounting, the Daily Prophet running obituaries that get longer every week, Dumbledore looking older and more tired at each Order meeting, and the Marauders are in the thick of it, taking risks that make Lily furious and their parents sick with worry, coming home with injuries that Madame Pomfrey, who volunteers her healing skills to the Order, has to mend. Learning to cast Patronuses not for fun, but because Dementors are being deployed by Death Eaters, and a Patronus is the only defense. James's Patronus is a stag, obviously, matching his animagus form, which is rare, but not unheard of, and it's powerful enough to drive back multiple Dementors at once, which is impressive magic by any standard. And you watch him teach Lily how to cast hers, standing behind her in their flat at 3 in the morning after a nightmare woke them both, guiding her wand movement and helping her find a happy memory strong enough to fuel the spell. And when her doe Patronus finally appears, silver and graceful and powerful, James makes a joke about them being meant to be even in magical form, and Lily laughs while wiping away tears because she's exhausted and scared and in love. Sirius's Patronus is also a dog, a great shaggy thing that matches Padfoot, and he uses it to send messages to other Order members, which is an advanced use of the spell that most wizards never master, encoding information in the Patronus itself so that it can carry complex communications across distances. Now here's something that will break your heart, which is that there's a photo from this era, taken at James and Lily's wedding in the summer of 1979, showing all four Marauders plus Lily and various Order members, and everyone in it is smiling and young and alive. And within 3 years, more than half the people in the photo will be dead, and looking at it now is like looking at ghosts. These beautiful, doomed children who have no idea what's coming. The wedding itself is small and secretive, because large gatherings are dangerous when there are Death Eaters hunting Order members, just close friends and family in a garden behind the Potter's house, with Sirius as best man giving a speech that makes everyone laugh and cry, talking about the first time he met James on the Hogwarts Express and how he knew immediately that his life had just gotten infinitely better and more complicated. Remus catches the bouquet by accident. Literally, it hits him in the face while he's not paying attention, and everyone laughs. But you can see him looking at the flowers like they're a prophecy he doesn't know how to read, knowing he'll never have what James and Lily have, because who would marry a werewolf? Who would take that risk? Peter's gift to the couple is a set of enchanted photo albums that update automatically with new photos, which is thoughtful and shows he's been paying attention to Lily's love of photography. But there's something sad in his face during the wedding, watching his friends pair off and move forward into adult lives while he feels stuck, still living alone, still working a job that doesn't fulfill him, still trying to prove his worth. You watch the war get worse through 1980, attacks becoming more frequent and more vicious, entire families wiped out for being Muggle-born or blood traitors, the Ministry increasingly ineffective as Death Eaters infiltrate its ranks, and Order members start dying. Not in glorious battles, but in ambushes and assassinations. Picked off one by one, and every meeting starts with Dumbledore reading names of the fallen and everyone sitting in heavy silence trying not to imagine their own names on that list. Marlene McKinnon dies with her whole family in the summer of '80, and you watch the Marauders at her funeral, stone-faced and furious, and after the funeral Sirius says they need to do more, take bigger risks, hunt Death Eaters instead of just defending against them, and James agrees. But Lily argues for strategy over revenge, and Remus tries to mediate while Peter just looks scared because he's watching his friends volunteer for suicide missions and he doesn't know if he's brave enough to follow. The Longbottoms are tortured in the autumn, though they survive, barely according to healer reports that describe their mental state as severely compromised with unknown potential for recovery. And this hits especially hard because Frank Longbottom was an Order member who worked closely with James on several missions, and seeing him reduced to a shell of himself in St. Mungo's is a preview of what could happen to any of them, and Lily has nightmares for weeks after visiting him. Now, I need to tell you about the prophecy, which is the hinge on which this entire story turns, though almost no one knows about it at the time, because Dumbledore keeps it secret except from those who absolutely need to know, which in this case means the Potters and the Longbottoms, because the prophecy could refer to either of their sons, both born at the end of July, to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort. Sybil Trelawney makes the prophecy in early 1980 during a job interview at the Hog's Head, which is a grimy pub in Hogsmeade owned by Dumbledore's brother Aberforth, and she goes into a trance and speaks in a voice that's not quite her own about a boy born as the 7th month dies who will have power. The Dark Lord knows not, and there's more to it, details about marking the boy as his equal and how neither can live while the other survives, which is the kind of cryptic nonsense that prophecies specialize in, but which Dumbledore takes very seriously because prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves even when people try to prevent them. You watch James and Lily receive this information with growing horror because they're going to have a baby. Lily is already pregnant, though barely showing, and suddenly their child is marked for death before he's even born, targeted by the most dangerous wizard alive. And how do you process that information? How do you prepare for it? The debate about whether to go into hiding starts immediately, with some order members arguing they should disappear now, use the Fidelius charm to hide completely, while others argue that hiding shows weakness and they should stay visible and keep fighting. And James is torn between his desire to fight and his responsibility to protect his family. And you can see the weight of impending fatherhood changing him, making him more serious, more careful, less likely to charge into danger without thinking. Harry James Potter is born on July 31st, 1980, at the height of summer in the middle of a war, and you watch James hold his son for the first time with an expression of such fierce love and terror that it's almost painful to witness, because this tiny, helpless thing is now the center of his entire universe and also marked for death by prophecy. And how do you reconcile those two facts? You're standing in the nursery of the Potter house in Godric's Hollow, watching James paint protective runes on the walls while Lily nurses baby Harry in the rocking chair by the window. And the domesticity of this scene is surreal given the circumstances, because outside these walls, there's a war raging, but inside, there's just a family trying to survive, trying to create moments of normalcy in circumstances that are anything but normal. And James is singing while he paints, some Quidditch chant from his Hogwarts days, because he refuses to let fear dominate every moment, even though fear is absolutely the rational response to their situation. The Fidelius charm is Dumbledore's suggestion, and it's brilliant in its simplicity, which is that you can hide an entire location inside a single person's soul, making it impossible for anyone to find the location unless the secret keeper chooses to reveal it. And in theory, this makes the Potters completely safe, because even if Voldemort tears the country apart searching for them, even if he tortures their friends and family, he cannot find them unless the secret keeper tells him where they are, which obviously no loyal friend would do, except that's not quite how it works out, is it? You watch the debate about who should be secret keeper with the sick knowledge of hindsight, knowing what's coming but unable to change it, as James immediately nominates Sirius because Sirius is his brother in every way that matters, the person he trusts most in the world besides Lily, the person who would die before betraying him. And Sirius agrees immediately because of course he does. He would do anything for James. But then something makes him hesitate. Maybe the weight of responsibility, maybe the knowledge that Death Eaters would come after him first, and he suggests Peter instead. The logic seems sound when Sirius explains it, which is that everyone knows James and Sirius are best friends, so Death Eaters would target Sirius first, would torture him for the secret, and even though Sirius would never tell, why put him in that position when they could use Peter, whom no one would suspect, whom Death Eaters would overlook as too insignificant to be trusted with something so important? And this is the tragic irony, isn't it, that they hide the Potters behind someone insignificant, and the insignificance is exactly what makes him vulnerable to corruption. You watch Peter when they ask him, and there's something in his face, some flicker of emotion that you can't quite read, maybe fear at the responsibility, maybe something else, something darker, but he agrees because how can he refuse? How can he say no to James Potter, who's been his friend since first year, who's never treated him as lesser even when others did, and maybe part of him is flattered to be trusted with something so crucial, to be chosen as essential when he's spent his life feeling expendable. The scholarly debate about Peter's betrayal has consumed academic careers, with entire books dedicated to analyzing when and why and how, with titles like The Psychology of Treachery, a study of Peter Pettigrew by Professor Charity Burbage, and Fear and Friendship, Understanding Betrayal in Wartime, by Professor Aurora Sinistra, and the consensus is complicated because it's not as simple as Peter being evil or always planning to betray them, but rather that fear and resentment and a lifetime of feeling inadequate combined with opportunity and pressure, and Voldemort's particularly insidious form of persuasion to corrupt someone who might have remained loyal under different circumstances. You watch Peter in the weeks after becoming Secret Keeper, and he's jumpy, nervous, avoiding eye contact at order meetings, and Remus notices, because Remus always notices these things, But when he asks if Peter's okay, Peter laughs it off and says he's just stressed about the war. Which is true but incomplete, because what he's really stressed about is the Death Eater who approached him last week with an offer that was more threat than offer. Join us or watch your friends die. Betray them or be betrayed? And how do you make that choice when you're already convinced that you're the weakest link, that you don't really belong in this group of heroes anyway? The moment of betrayal doesn't happen all at once, but in stages. First, Peter just listening to the Death Eater's pitch without reporting it to the Order, which is already a betrayal of protocol. Then Peter agreeing to think about it, which is agreeing to something. Then Peter actually meeting with them again, which is crossing a line that can't be uncrossed. And finally, Peter telling them the location of the Potter's house, which is the ultimate unforgivable act. Though he probably tells himself right up until the moment Voldemort arrives at Godric's Hollow that he can still fix this, still warn them, still be the hero instead of the traitor. Now, I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? And I know that's an odd thing to ask in the middle of this tragedy, but I genuinely want to know, so write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Because there's something beautiful about how stories cross borders and languages and connect people who have nothing in common except their love for these characters. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the wands and spells, but the way narratives bind us together across distance and time. You watch October 31st, 1981, and it's Halloween, which should be fun, should be about costumes and candy, and Harry's first time dressing up, and Lily has gotten him a tiny lion costume, because of course she has. Gryffindor pride even for a 1-year-old, and James is taking a million photos while Harry wobbles around the living room, and it's so painfully normal that you want to scream at them to run, to grab Harry and disapparate and never look back. But they can't run because they believe they're safe. They believe the Fidelius charm is protecting them. They believe their friend would never betray them. Voldemort arrives after dark when Harry is already in bed and James is reading the Prophet and Lily is making tea. And the first sign something is wrong is when the wards shatter, which shouldn't be possible, which means someone told Voldemort exactly how to break them. And James yells for Lily to take Harry and run while he holds Voldemort off, and this is suicide. Holding off the most powerful dark wizard alive without even grabbing his wand first. But it's the only choice that gives his family any chance at all. You watch James die in the hallway, hit with Avada Kedavra before he can even draw his wand, dying instantly, which is at least quick, at least not torture, just alive and then not alive. And his last thought is probably hoping he bought enough time, hoping Lily and Harry got away, not knowing that there's nowhere to run because the house is surrounded by Death Eaters and escape was never really an option. Lily makes it to the nursery, and she's grabbing Harry, who's crying because he can sense something wrong, and she's trying to think of a way out, any way out, but Voldemort is already there, already telling her to step aside, and this is the moment that changes everything because Voldemort is offering her a choice. He'll spare her if she lets him kill Harry, and Snape made him promise this because Snape still loves Lily, even though she married James, even though she chose someone else. And Voldemort is honoring that promise in his own twisted way by giving Lily a chance to live. But Lily doesn't step aside. She stands in front of Harry's crib and begs Voldemort to kill her instead, take her life and spare her son. And this is old magic, the oldest magic, sacrifice freely given out of love, and Voldemort doesn't understand it because he's never loved anything except power, never sacrificed anything except other people. And when he kills Lily and then tries to kill Harry, the curse rebounds because Lily's sacrifice has created a protection that even the killing curse can't penetrate. And suddenly the most powerful dark wizard in the world is destroyed by a mother's love and a 1-year-old baby, which sounds like a fairy tale, but it's exactly what happens. You watch Voldemort's physical form disintegrate, his soul ripped apart and scattered, leaving behind only a crying child and a lightning bolt scar and a house full of ghosts. Sirius arrives first because he's been checking on the house obsessively, even though he knows he can't get through the Fidelius charm. And when he feels the wards break, he knows something is horribly wrong, and he races there on his motorcycle, which is enchanted to fly, and goes considerably faster than the speed limit. And what he finds is so much worse than anything he imagined, because James is dead in the hallway, and Lily is dead in the nursery, and Harry is crying in his crib surrounded by rubble, and Sirius's brain breaks a little bit right then. You can see it in his face, something fundamental shattering because his entire world was James and Lily and the Marauders, and now James is gone and Lily is gone, and there's only this crying baby who looks so much like James, it's like seeing a ghost. Hagrid arrives next because Dumbledore sent him. Somehow, Dumbledore already knows what happened. He has ways of monitoring such things, ancient spells tied to prophecies and vows. And Hagrid is crying, huge tears running down his face into his beard, and he's gentle when he picks up Harry, so careful with this tiny orphan baby. And Sirius wants to take Harry, wants to raise James's son himself because that's what James would have wanted. But Hagrid has orders from Dumbledore, and those orders are absolute. So Sirius does something that seems insane in the moment, but makes a certain desperate sense. He gives Hagrid his flying motorcycle because Hagrid needs it more to transport Harry safely, and Sirius no longer cares about possessions or safety or anything except finding Peter Pettigrew and making him pay for what he's done. You watch Sirius hunt Peter through the streets of London, and he finds him in a crowded Muggle area, which should have been Peter's first clue that something terrible was about to happen. And Peter is backed into a corner literally and figuratively because he knows, Sirius knows. You can see it in the way he's shaking, the way his wand hand trembles, and for a moment you think maybe he'll surrender. Maybe he'll confess and throw himself on Dumbledore's mercy, but instead, he does something brilliant and evil. He shouts, "How could you betray James and Lily?" loud enough for all the Muggles to hear. And then he blows up the street, killing 12 Muggles with a single curse, and in the chaos, he cuts off his own finger and transforms into a rat and disappears into the sewers, leaving behind a finger and accusations, and Sirius standing in the rubble laughing. Because sometimes when tragedy becomes absurd, the only response is laughter, the kind that sounds like screaming. The Aurors find Sirius laughing in the wreckage surrounded by bodies, and they assume he's the traitor. He's the secret keeper who betrayed the Potters and murdered 12 Muggles to cover his tracks. And Sirius doesn't even try to defend himself because what's the point? Peter is gone, and James is dead, and Lily is dead, and Harry is lost somewhere in the system, and Sirius Black is so broken that Azkaban almost seems appropriate, seems like the external manifestation of his internal state. And you watch them drag him away to a prison guarded by Dementors, creatures that feed on happiness and hope. And Sirius has neither of those things left anyway, so what difference does it make? Remus hears about the death's third hand, reading about it in the Prophet the next morning because no one thought to tell him directly, which tells you something about how even within the Order, he was always slightly separate, always the outsider. And you watch him read the headline, "Potter family murdered, Black arrested for betrayal," and his face goes through so many emotions, denial and horror and grief and rage, and then he's alone, because Remus is always alone in the end. That's been his story since he was 5 years old and got bitten by a werewolf. And now 3 of his 4 best friends are gone. James dead, Peter dead, or so everyone believes. Sirius worse than dead, locked in Azkaban for a crime Remus believes he committed, because why wouldn't he believe it? The evidence is overwhelming. The full moon that month is the worst Remus has ever experienced. Transforming alone for the first time in years, no prongs to run beside him. No Padfoot to keep him from hurting himself, no Wormtail to scout ahead, just the wolf alone in the forest. And when he transforms back, he's covered in self-inflicted wounds because the wolf was trying to claw its way out of its own skin, trying to escape grief that has no escape, and Remus seriously considers not treating the wounds, just letting infection take him. Because what's the point of surviving when everyone you love is gone? But he does treat the wounds, and he does survive, because that's what Remus Lupin does. He survives, it's his superpower and his curse, outliving everyone, carrying their memories when they can't carry them anymore. Peter lives in rat form for 12 years, which is a fact that seems impossible until you remember that rats are survivors. They're adaptable and hardy and can live almost anywhere. And Peter finds the Weasley family through a series of coincidences that seem almost like fate. Like the universe wanted him near another student at Hogwarts, wanted him back in the castle he fled 13 years ago. You watch him through those years, always listening, always anxious, sleeping in Ron Weasley's pocket and hearing things he shouldn't hear, about Harry Potter attending Hogwarts, about Sirius Black escaping from Azkaban, about Voldemort not being as dead as everyone assumed. And through it all, Peter stays in rat form, because he's too afraid to be human, too afraid of facing what he's done, too afraid of the consequences that are absolutely coming, even if they take 12 years to arrive. The Marauders' story could have ended differently at 100 different points, and you can trace the branch points, like mapping alternate timelines, if Peter had told someone about the Death Eater's approach, if Sirius had stayed Secret Keeper instead of suggesting Peter, if James had grabbed his wand before confronting Voldemort, if Lily had stepped aside when given the chance, though thank God she didn't, because then Harry would be dead and Voldemort would have won. If Remus had been there that night instead of on a mission for the Order, if Dumbledore had insisted on being Secret Keeper himself, which several scholars argue he should have done. Professor Elphias Doge wrote an essay called The Burden of Prophecy. Could the tragedy have been prevented? That argues Dumbledore made strategic errors in handling the prophecy and protecting the Potters, while Professor Minerva McGonagall countered with in defense of difficult choices, leadership in wartime, arguing that Dumbledore made the best decisions possible with incomplete information and limited resources. And honestly, they're both right, because war is chaos, and hindsight is useless, and sometimes terrible things happen despite everyone's best efforts. You watch Harry grow up with the Dursleys, not knowing he's famous, not knowing his parents died heroes, not knowing he has a godfather rotting in prison, not knowing 3 of his parents' best friends sacrificed everything for him. And this ignorance is both protective and cruel, because it keeps him safe, but also keeps him from understanding who he is and where he comes from. The Marauders' map stays hidden in Hogwarts for years, confiscated from someone who found it somewhere. The chain of custody is murky in the records, ending up in Filch's office in a drawer labeled confiscated and highly dangerous, which is honestly where it belongs, given what it can do in the wrong hands, and it waits there like a time bomb until Fred and George Weasley steal it in Harry's first year, those magnificent thieves who are basically the Marauders reincarnated. And they use it for years before passing it to Harry in his 3rd year, which feels like fate or irony or possibly both. James's son receiving his father's greatest creation from 2 boys who remind everyone of James and Sirius. When Harry finally learns about the Marauders in his 3rd year from Lupin, who's teaching defense against the dark arts, you watch his face as he realizes these legendary pranksters were his father and his father's friends, these people who made a magical map and became Animagi and fought against Voldemort were real people who loved and laughed and made mistakes. And there's something beautiful about legacy, about stories passing from generation to generation, about dead men living on in memories and objects and the children they left behind. Sirius escapes from Azkaban in Harry's 3rd year, the first person ever to escape that supposedly escape-proof prison, and he does it by transforming into a dog and slipping through the bars, because Dementors can sense human emotions, but not animal emotions, which means being an animagus saved his life, 12 years after he learned the skill to help his werewolf friend, which is irony so thick you could cut it with a knife. The reunion between Sirius and Remus in the Shrieking Shack is emotionally devastating because they've both been alone for 12 years, both believing the other betrayed them, both carrying guilt and grief that's been festering for over a decade, and when they finally understand what really happened, when Peter is revealed alive and traitorous, you watch them process 12 years of wrongness in a matter of minutes, and it's too much, it's overwhelming. They're furious and relieved and broken, and somehow still themselves underneath all the trauma. Peter's exposure in the Shrieking Shack should have been the end of his story, should have been justice finally served, but he escapes again because he's always been good at escaping, and he runs straight back to Voldemort, because where else can he go? What else can he do except fully commit to the choice he made 13 years ago? And you watch him help resurrect Voldemort using Harry's blood and his own hand, sacrificing his hand to bring back the master who will ultimately destroy him. Because that's how these stories work. Betrayers are consumed by the things they betray everyone for. You're standing at the edge of the story now, watching it spiral toward its inevitable conclusion, and you know how this ends because history has already written it, but knowing doesn't make it easier as you watch Sirius try to build a relationship with Harry while being hunted by the Ministry, living in his family's old house at Grimmauld Place, which he hates because it's full of dark magic and memories of a childhood that damaged him in ways he never fully healed from. And yet, he stays there because Dumbledore needs a headquarters for the Order, and Sirius will do anything to fight Voldemort, anything to avenge James and Lily, anything to protect their son, even if protecting him means hiding in a house that feels like a prison after just escaping an actual prison. You watch Sirius teaching Harry about his parents in those stolen moments between Order business, showing him photos and telling stories about pranks and Quidditch matches and the time James got so nervous before asking Lily out that he accidentally transfigured his own shoes into ducks and had to walk around quacking for an entire afternoon until McGonagall took pity on him and reversed it. And these stories are treasures for Harry, who spent his whole life not knowing anything real about James and Lily, except that they died. And now he's learning they lived, they laughed, they were young and foolish and brave and completely, wholly human. Remus is teaching at Hogwarts again when he can, though his werewolf status keeps getting him fired or makes parents complain, and there's a particular injustice to this because he's literally one of the best defense against the dark arts teachers Hogwarts has ever had. According to student evaluations compiled by Professor McGonagall, but prejudice doesn't care about competence. And you watch him pack his office again and again, always knowing it's coming, always hoping maybe this time will be different. Always disappointed but never surprised. The Department of Mysteries battle in 1995 is chaos, a dozen Death Eaters against 6 teenagers who are brave but catastrophically unprepared, and the Order arrives just in time to prevent total disaster but not in time to prevent tragedy. And you watch Sirius dueling his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange, and there's history there, childhood together in the same house before Sirius ran away, family gatherings where they were expected to uphold pureblood values, and now they're trying to kill each other, and Bellatrix hits him with a curse that knocks him backward through the veil in the death chamber, which is basically a permanent one-way door to death, and Sirius is gone, just gone. Fallen through and never coming back, and Harry is screaming and trying to follow, but Remus holds him back because someone has to survive. Someone has to keep living even when it seems impossible. The cruelty of Sirius's death is that he spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit, escaped and spent 2 years as a fugitive hiding in his childhood home that he despised, got maybe 2 years total of semi-freedom to know his godson, and then died believing he was finally doing something that mattered, finally fighting the good fight, and the universe rewarded his courage by shoving him through a magical death curtain, which seems cosmically unfair. But war doesn't care about fairness. War just takes and takes and takes until there's nothing left to take. You watch Remus after Sirius dies, and he's so alone now, 3 of the Marauders dead and 1 a traitor. and he throws himself into order work with a desperation that looks like dedication, but is actually just grief with nowhere else to go, taking the most dangerous missions, volunteering to go undercover with werewolf packs loyal to Voldemort, and Tonks falls in love with him during this period which he tries to reject because he's convinced he's too old, too poor, too dangerous, too damaged, but Tonks is persistent in the way that Sirius used to be persistent, refusing to accept Remus's self-loathing as fact, and eventually Remus allows himself to be loved, which is maybe the bravest thing he's ever done. Braver than becoming an animagus or fighting Death Eaters, just letting someone see him completely and staying anyway. They get married in 1997. A small ceremony because war is still raging and large gatherings are targets, and you watch Remus say his vows with wonder in his voice, like he can't believe this is real, like he's waiting for someone to realize the mistake and take it all back. And when they have a son, Teddy, named after Tonks's father, Remus is terrified because what if the child is a werewolf? What if he's passed on his curse? But Teddy is a metamorphmagus like his mother, able to change his appearance at will, which is its own kind of magic. And for a brief moment, Remus allows himself to hope that maybe they'll survive this war. Maybe they'll get to raise their son in peace. Maybe the story has a happy ending after all. But this is war, and war doesn't do happy endings, or at least not for everyone, and the Battle of Hogwarts in 1998 is the culmination of everything, every choice and sacrifice and loss leading to this final confrontation, and you watch Death Eaters attack the castle while students and teachers and Order members defend it. Curses flying through corridors where children learned magic, people dying in classrooms where they once felt safe, and somewhere in the chaos, Remus and Tonks are fighting side by side because of course they are. They're partners in everything, and a Death Eater's curse finds Tonks first, and then Remus dies trying to protect her body, or maybe it happens the other way around. The accounts are contradictory. And in the chaos of battle, who can say for certain? But the result is the same. They die together, leaving their son an orphan, which is a tragedy that echoes through time because now Teddy Lupin will grow up the way Harry Potter grew up, without parents, raised by grandparents, and then by his godfather Harry, the cycle of loss repeating like a curse that can't be broken. Peter dies that same night in a moment that's almost anticlimactic, given everything he's done, killed by his own silver hand, which Voldemort gave him as a replacement for the one he sacrificed, and the hand strangles him when he shows a moment of mercy to Harry, hesitates in killing him, and the enchantment Voldemort built into the hand interprets hesitation as betrayal, and executes Peter immediately, which is poetic justice if you like your justice dark and ironic. The traitor killed by the master he betrayed everyone for, paying for his treachery in the exact currency he traded. The thing about the Marauders that most people miss is that they were never just pranksters or troublemakers or even just friends. They were a response to darkness, a refusal to let fear and prejudice and evil define their world. And yes, they made mistakes. Yes, James was arrogant and Sirius was reckless and Remus was passive and Peter was weak. But they were also brave and loyal and creative and willing to break unjust rules to protect people they loved. And that matters. That means something even after they're gone. Especially after they're gone, because their legacy lives on in Harry, who carries his father's courage and his mother's love, in Teddy, who carries his parents' magic, in the map that still shows every corridor of Hogwarts to students who need it, in the stories that get passed down about 4 boys who became brothers and changed everything. You watch Harry name his children after the people he lost, James Sirius and Albus Severus and Lily Luna, carrying forward the names like prayers or promises, making sure that even though they're gone, they're not forgotten. And this is what we do with grief, isn't it? We turn it into memory. We tell stories about the dead to keep them alive. We pass down names and values and the lessons they taught us about courage and love and sacrifice. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the wands and spells, but the way humans refuse to let death have the final word. the way we keep loving people even after they're gone, the way we let their lives shape ours even decades later. The Marauder's story is ultimately about friendship that transcends everything, including death, about loyalty that persists even when the person you're loyal to is gone, about how the best of us live on in the people we loved and the choices they make because they knew us. And if that's not magic, then I don't know what is. This alchemy of memory and love that transforms loss into legacy, and you're feeling sleepy now, aren't you? The weight of this story settling over you like a blanket, because stories about love and loss and friendship have a way of exhausting us, of pulling out emotions we didn't know we were holding, and that's okay. That's good. Even let yourself feel it. Let yourself sink into the sadness and the beauty of four boys who had everything and lost almost all of it, but whose friendship burned so bright that we're still talking about it decades later, still analyzing their choices and debating their mistakes and telling their story to anyone who'll listen. And your eyes are getting heavy now, so heavy, and the words are starting to blur together like ink on parchment left too long in rain. And you can picture them, can't you? James and Sirius and Remus and Peter, young forever in memory even though three of them died and one became something worse than dead. You can see them in the Gryffindor common room planning their next prank, on the Hogwarts grounds transforming into animals under the full moon, in the room of requirement hunched over the map adding one more secret passage. And they're laughing because that's what you do when you're young and brilliant and convinced that friendship makes you invincible. And maybe it does in a way. Maybe the real immortality is being remembered, being loved even after you're gone, having your story told by strangers decades later to other strangers who feel like they knew you, who mourn you even though you died before they were born. And that's beautiful, isn't it? That's the real magic. And you're so sleepy now, barely keeping your eyes open. And it's okay to let go, okay to let sleep take you, because the story is done. The Marauders have lived and died and been remembered, and you've walked beside them through all of it, through the laughter and the tears and the pranks and the war and the love and the loss. And now it's time to rest, time to let it all fade like the final scene of a film. The screen getting darker and darker until there's nothing but peaceful blackness. And you're floating now in that space between waking and dreaming where stories feel real and magic seems possible. Where four boys are still young and alive somewhere in your mind, still friends, still marauders, still mischief managed and adventure pending, and your breathing is slowing down, each breath deeper and more relaxed than the last, and the weight of your body against the bed or couch or wherever you're lying is so comfortable, so perfectly comfortable that moving seems impossible, unnecessary. And why would you move anyway when you're this perfectly, peacefully still, this close to sleep, this ready to let go of consciousness and drift into dreams where maybe you'll see them? Maybe you'll walk the corridors of Hogwarts and find a piece of parchment that shows you exactly where you need to go, and footsteps in the hallway that might be Prongs and Padfoot and Moony and even Wormtail before everything went wrong, before betrayal and death and war. Just four friends in a castle full of magic and possibility, and you're there with them somehow. Part of the story even though you're also hearing the story, and it's all becoming softer now, quieter. The words, like whispers in the dark, like someone telling you it's okay to sleep, okay to stop fighting consciousness and just let yourself fall into the soft dark, nothing, where there's no pain or loss or grief, just peace, just the gentle nothing of dreamless sleep, or maybe dreams so soft they feel like floating. And the last thing you remember as you finally let go completely is the image of a map folding in on itself, secrets hiding again, mischief managed and everything peaceful and quiet and done, and you sleep.